بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا Muhammad وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Welcome everybody, inshallah, to Taklīm, Open Madrasas, Open Conversation. Really excited today to have with me an erudite scholar, mashallah ta'ala, an Ustad, Dr. Shoaib Malik, who currently is based in Scotland. So he's close to many of you that will be listening to this, inshallah ta'ala. First and foremost, ahlan wa sahlan to Maulana Dr. Shoaib.
Wa alaikum salam, Shaykhna. Thank you very much for inviting me, for having this conversation, inshallah.
Inshallah. No, ahlan wa sahlan. We're really, really excited and very honored and humbled to have you here. And the reason we're having this conversation, of course, is that, alhamdulillah, we have a course that we are going to be teaching together, Hidayat al-Hikma, introducing classical Islamic philosophy. And so we've been talking about this for a long time, and alhamdulillah, it's now come to be, inshallah ta'ala. So we thought we'll have a conversation about Islamic philosophy in general, and Hidayat al-Hikma in specific. So inshallah, it's just a general conversation. So hopefully nobody's going to mind if there isn't too much technicality to what we're saying. But let me begin by asking you, Dr. When you think of Islamic philosophy, we have the classical definitions, but if you want to just introduce it to somebody that's hearing it for the first time, how would you introduce it? What would you say?
Bismillah. So first and foremost, I would like to start by saying that just for everyone here, Maulana Shams is my teacher. So please don't be blurred by the titles. He is my Shaykh. So I just wanted to clarify that from the very beginning. I've been studying him for the past few months. No, more than a year now, mashallah, right? More than a year, mashallah. Absolutely brilliant teacher, mashallah. So with that said, I'm done, that caveat out of the way. What I want to do is start off with by just talking about what we mean by philosophy, because when we use that term today, it has a very different connotation than what it meant in the past, particularly in the Islamic context. And I think people get really riled up or confused because of these different historical connotations attached to the word falsafa, right? And so I think that when we think of philosophy today, if you go to any university, the first thing you're going to get bombarded with is Plato, Aristotle, if you're doing it historically, or you're going to look at these terms called metaphysics, epistemology, or logic, and you will go through various thinkers in each of those subject matters. So you'll go across Kant, you'll go across Descartes, you'll go across Spinoza, etc., etc. And that's what philosophy means today. It's specifically looking into things like metaphysics, epistemology, aesthetics, axiology, etc., etc. So it's a very mature subject that you can get into. But when we talk about philosophy in the past, in our context, it means specifically the ideas of a certain group of thinkers who took on certain conceptions of Aristotle and Plato that went through Christian sources and transmissions that are eventually Islamized by people like al-Farabi and Ibn Sina. And it's primarily Ibn Sina who shapes what we now know as philosophy. And so if the most prominent book, the Hafid al-Falasifa, al-Ghazali, right? It's like a refutation of the ideas of the philosophers, but he makes it very explicit who he's talking about. It is specifically al-Farabi and Avicenna. And I think this is where you get this amazing, interesting shift and discussion and impregnation in Kalam, where you have the mutakallimin, who are, the theologians. They begin to engage, dissect, discuss, and entertain the ideas of Ibn Sina. And this sets a whole trajectory in post-Ghazalian scholars that makes them think about how we can or cannot appropriate this. So that's one of the main distinction between philosophy today and philosophy in these books. So the question is, Shaykh Saab, why is that background important for our course? Now you tell me, Shaykh Saab.
Barakallah feek. No, that was a wonderful introduction. Thank you for that so much. You're right. It's because when people are coming to a course like this, they assume it's going to be that philosophy that they took at A level or at university or something like that, but it's not. And you're very specific, and it's a lot. Particularly what you're talking about, which is this Masha'i, Avicennan type of philosophy, the philosophy of the hukama, as they're known in our books. Yeah. It's actually not that detailed. It's not that detailed. Of course, it is detailed, but as you said, I mean, Ghazali says, rahimahullah ta'ala, that I studied it in 2 years, right? So he mastered it in 2 years. Now, of course, that's Ghazali. So, but the point is that it was a smaller subject in that sense. But what's also interesting, I thought I'd pick up on this, what you mentioned, that even like philosophy in the Islamic tradition, it developed. And so most of the engagement was with the Masha'i aspect of philosophy, not the Ishraqi aspect of philosophy, which was really the area of many Sufis and people like that, right?
So
So,
Harvadi, yeah.
so that all comes in later. So that sort of post-Dawani, that really kind of creeps in. So it's interesting because what we're studying is, it's a bit like, this is maybe a good comparable for somebody that's been studying Kalam. We're studying that classical period of philosophy here in this course. We're not studying a post-classical philosophy, meaning we're not
Mhm.
studying philosophy when it's at its heyday, mixing together all of these different turuq or different parts of philosophy. We're really just focusing on Abyssinian philosophy. Hence the text Hidayat al-Hikma, which is essentially I wouldn't call it a summary per se, but it is a summarized form of Ayn al-Hikma of Abyssinia. So it's really just, and I think you mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, that, really you can use the isharat as a commentary, for Hidayat al-Hikma, as well as its own
Yeah.
commentary. So it really is in that, it's a summary of Abyssinian's philosophy and his theology. So that's really really, we could have titled this course as Abyssinian philosophy, and that would have made sense. Now, the reason why we didn't is because we wanted to have fun in the course, which means that there is going to be the appearance of people like Mullah Sadra, here and there. There will be the appearance of Maybudi and even Shaykh al-Akbar ibn Arabi and other thinkers and ideas that come off these issues. So, we want to have a bit of fun with it. We don't want to restrict it just to Avicenna, but it really is just that. It's that Masha'i peripatetic philosophy of classical Islamic philosophy.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah. So for those who may not register the key works, so Avicenna wrote Ash-Shifa, he wrote the Isharat wal Tanbihat, and people have done commentaries on this. So from our side, Fakhruddin al-Razi has a whole sharh, he has a whole commentary on that work, right?
and
And
Tusi on that.
Nasiruddin Tusi, yeah. So I was able to get luckily a copy from Iran on this very work. So,
Mhm.
so these are very, very significant commentaries that make Avicenna's ideas even clearer for us. So, if you were to distill all of those things into a very summative but dense text, you will get Hidayat al-Hikmah, which is
Mm,
the short text that we are teaching. Now, the thing
that's a great
is,
point.
the thing is, it's very short. Like if you literally just have the bare bone, it's just a few pages. It's really just a few pages. But if you want to now explain it, particularly to the beginner, it
Yes.
requires unpacking, like really teasing out bit by bit what is exactly that he's saying. So before we get into some examples, Mosab, I think it might be good to give students a map, right? So what is the structure of the book?
Okay. I was supposed to be asking you the questions. Okay. So the book, he breaks it down to three qisms, right? So it's three qisms, what he calls it. So three
Yeah.
parts. The first part is logic. Interestingly, it's a very summary, sort of summarized version of logic. Obviously, Abhari, the author, is more famous for his Isa Hoji.
Yeah.
And this has similar in style. And I do recommend, and obviously this is going to be the reading material definitely for the students on the course, to read Tawfiq al-Attas's his introduction. It was actually his PhD to Hidayat al-Hikmah, where he outlines and delineates some of these points really, really well.
And that also
So,
contains a translation, Sheikh Saab, right? That's
of
also
course
the
it does. Of
translation of
course it
the.
does. Absolutely, absolutely. It does have the translation as well. And it's a wonderful preface. And in fact, there's a preface to the preface, and by Alp Arslan, Professor Alp Arslan, who was a specialist
Mm.
in Mullah Sadra, currently based here in Malaysia, but obviously he's from Turkey. In any case, the first section is mantiq, which is a prerequisite for anyone that wants to engage in philosophy or even theology, particularly Kalam theology. And then the second section is natural philosophy, which is, inshallah, where Dr. is going to be teaching. And he's the perfect person for it. And I said this to somebody. I said it was a light bulb moment for me because he's both, a theologian as well as a physicist, a scientist. And so, who better to teach natural philosophy than him? And the reason why I say that, and I'm gonna push you to elaborate on this. And I know you really didn't want to spend too much time, going into detail, but just a little bit I'm going to ask you about this in just a moment. Um, because we had this conversation earlier as well, which is you're doing natural philosophy. I mean, basically physics, but this is physics from, you know, this is physics from a long time ago, right? And so, we don't really have the concept of anasir arba'a, in the same way, the four elements making up, this whatever, and you can still use it. Some of it's very helpful still, but a lot of it isn't there. Even the way we look at the planets, the planetary system, or the fact that whether the Earth is moving or not, etc. Lots of things have changed. So who better than somebody that can contextualize all of that, and make that make sense? So we're going to be really excited to have you teaching us natural philosophy. And the third part is metaphysics, which is ma wara al-tabi'iyat. So this is beyond the physics, literally the metaphysics. And this is essentially Ibn Sina's theology. That's what it is. This is his ilm al-kalam. This is what he believes about God. It's what he believes about the attributes of God. It's what he believes about the relationship of God to his creation, what he believes about immaterial being, which is going to be a huge one. And the reason why is because that's, particularly in our day, for some reason, that's a really hot topic, it seems, right? The concept of, nominalism and immaterial being, and this is really important. So that's all covered at the end, and his concept of the uqul, of the intellects, and what essentially what he would then believe as angels. All of that is contained in that section, and so the faqir, inshallah, is going to be attempting to lecture on that, inshallah ta'ala. And that's it. So the way we planned it is that in the summer there will be logic, and that will be a prerequisite. In the summer, you have to get that done over August. Once that's done, you're ready for September, where the first term is going to begin, and that's going to be natural philosophy. And then after, in the fall, you're going to have metaphysics. And so, inshallah, in one academic year, what a student would have seen is the entire, you could say, body of Islamic philosophy. Of course, we're not claiming here that we're going to go into super detail and all of the khilaf. No, on some issues, maybe, where there'll be some reading and some debate and argument, etc., in the class, and that's how we both like it in our classes. But most of the taxonomy of the hukama would be covered. Most of the istilahat, their technical parlance or terminology, will be covered in that period. So, okay, with that, so now the idea of, oh, that's amazing. We've got here ourselves, somebody in theology and physics, combining them to teach us classical physics, so to speak. What does that look like? What's an example of that, Sidi?
Yeah. So, just as a joke for people who may not know this, so I remember getting a call from Mullah Shams one day, and he said, "Shoaib, I have a wonderful idea." I'm like, "What is it?" I have a new course idea. Like, tell me. And then he tells me about Hidayat al-Hikma. I remember he's like, "Shoaib, I don't like natural philosophy. I want you to teach the natural philosophy." I'm like, "Okay, that's fine." So I still remember that. That was a funny moment in my head. But what is natural philosophy in that period as opposed to this period? So we have to understand, and you rightfully pointed out, that when we do physics or science today, our entire conception of cosmology, of the universe, is so drastically different to what Avicenna had in mind. And we can give a very basic example here. One of the things that you will find, and this may be very difficult for students to grasp, which is why we've spread the text out very thinly over a long period of time, so that you can really grasp each proposition bit by bit. So one of the things that you see people entertaining is the whole structure of the solar system, which in their world was the whole cosmos. That was the entirety of creation. So you have Earth in the middle, and then you have these planetary spheres going around. In fact, can I share an image, Sheikh Saab? Are we allowed to? Do we have? Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Bismillah. Yeah, of course.
Bismillah. Okay, let me pick this out. So so as you can imagine, this is completely unscripted. So we're just like going with the flow here, mashallah. But let me just
MashaAllah.
open up this image. Here, there we go. This is article 11. Here we are. So Melissa, just let me know if you can see the text or not. Can you confirm if you can see anything, Sheikh Saab?
Nothing
Or
as of
no?
yet. No, I
Oh,
can't see anything.
why?
Oh, yeah, here we
Nothing?
go. Bismillah. Yeah, Bismillah.
Oh, you can see it now,
Yeah,
yeah?
yeah, yeah, we
So,
can see it, we can see it.
okay, great. So this is part of an article, and that's one of the things that inshallah we'll be incorporating. We'll be giving you a wide variety of texts, inshallah, that are both classical as well from contemporary sources. So I have a graphics background, so I love drawing in my free time. And so this was actually the structure that they believed back in that day, in the time of Avicenna, and this was also picked up by Razi. He also engaged with these ideas. So in the middle, you have the earth, and they believed that the Earth was surrounded by several concentric spheres. And where did this idea come from? It came from Aristotle. And that's why I tell students of Kalam, you cannot understand Kalam, let alone philosophy theology, unless you go back to Plato and Aristotle, because they really are the roots of a lot of these conversations. And in that worldview, you had these big seven planets, right? So you have the moon, Mercury, Venus, the sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and then you have the fixed stars, right? Al-Kawakib al-Thabita. These are the fixed stars that, and in Aristotle's vision of things, each of these planets were in an orb, and these orbs would circulate around the Earth. And so when Maulana Saab is talking about the uqul, which is something you will learn, the intellect, so to speak, it corresponds to each of these concentric spheres. And this is where you begin to see that, this modern divorce between metaphysics and physics, it's very intimately tied up in Avicennan thought. And so part of the discussion that we're going to have is, inshallah, is what is the conception that they had of planets, planetary motion? What is the division between everything that's in yellow here versus what is in blue here, right? So just as a fun fact, everything here in yellow is made of a fifth element called ether. Everything in that blue circle are made of the four composites, right? So the four composites back in those days, their periodic table, so to speak, were things like fire, water, earthly materials. For those of you who watch Captain Planet, you know the famous four. So you will know the four elements, right? So all of this was baked into Avicennan natural philosophy. So understanding those principles bit by bit and understanding what that means or what could that correlate to today is what we'll be discussing about, inshallah. Now, I know this may seem like a lot. Oh, what is he saying? What does he mean by uqul? What does he mean by concentric spheres? I don't want anyone to be alarmed. All of these points will be unpacked, but I just wanted to, make it a point that the cosmology, the physics, even the chemistry of the day is vastly different to what we now know. And so when we go back into those classical texts, in the absence of that context, that's why some of these Kalami texts and these philosophy texts become very confusing. But if you want to get a really solid understanding of how Ghazali was engaging with Avicenna, of how Razi was engaging with Avicenna, all of these discussions form the backdrop to that. So inshallah, the plan is we'll hopefully be using a lot of interesting sources with substantiated, readings for you to have, after the classes as well as before the classes, so you can get a good coherent overview of where Avicenna is coming from, inshallah.
Wonderful, wonderful. And that's exactly the point here, which is that sometimes when the thing is, let's say you've got a student that they did science at school, or maybe even they did it at university, let's say to that level, graduate level or whatever, and then they want to study kalam. So they'll come in and then let's say they study quite to a good level and they're studying cosmology and they're looking at that concept and they kind of look at this and they think to themselves, well, hold on a minute, I don't get this, because this is history. We're learning history here. And so I think making that jump, that leap can be quite difficult. And also, what's really interesting, so if somebody was looking into this, what you just said here, they'd be like, oh, that's straightforward. Yeah, that makes perfect sense, right? I got that right away. The problem is when you're studying it from a classical text and they're using the terms like the uqul, or they're using terms like this is naw'iyya, this is jismaniyya, and so people kind of get a little bit like confused or surah naw'iyya. What does that mean? Right?
Yes.
It's just Arabic. It's just
Yeah.
Arabic. And I think that's one of the biggest problems is not being able to articulate that correctly in the English language. Because when done correctly, and I always say this, by the way, I always say that a mark of a great teacher is that they can make a very difficult concept seem almost too easy to be true. Almost too easy to be true because it's normally understood so well or articulated so well that it's like, this is just too easy. I always give the example. I have a couple of teachers, many teachers like that, but a couple that like stand out. I have one of my teachers was Hafiz Gul in my Darul Uloom. He was one teacher that could do that, where he could take very difficult concepts of usul al-fiqh. And is that really what it's saying? Because it seems almost too easy. It seems like it should be harder, but they're just great teachers. Another one was Dr. Hamza Bakri. Dr. Hamza Bakri, anyone that's ever engaged with Dr. Hamza Bakri, it's like, really, it must be harder. No, they're just really marvelous teachers because they've understood it really well. And so like, what you just did there, it's marvelous because it's straightforward. It's, oh, I get that now. Yeah, there's a bit of technical terminology in there, but with a bit of unpacking, I'll get that. But it's all straightforward. And I think that's the whole point. Because what we found is, I don't think to date there has been anything in Hikmah being taught in the English language formally in that sense. I'm sure in the seminaries I know and stuff that they teach books and things like that, but I don't think there's been something accessible, because you do have a lot of people out there on the internet around the world that are talking about philosophy, Islamic philosophy, etc. So it'd be really good to go through a systematic study, and so everything becomes clear. And one other thing I'd say on this is that it really is important to understand that studying Kalam has prerequisites. Ultimately, we want people to get to theology, but the prerequisites are logic and philosophy, because a lot of the arguments and terms and again, the nomenclature that's going to be used in those works of Kalam is coming not just directly, but with all of the connotations and the historical context straight in. It's literally being picked up from that context and put into that text of Kalam. And so understanding all of that, rather than spending that time in the Kalam work to explain philosophy, it's better if it was just done beforehand.
Yeah.
So inshallah, I think that's going to be really good. I think if you'd allow, Sidi, I'm going to quickly just show the an overview of the course ever so briefly.
Bismillah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And while Mullah
طيب.
Sab is picking that up, sorry, I was going to say something. I
No,
thought it was going to
Bismillah.
take time.
No,
Okay.
no, Bismillah,
Oh
Bismillah.
no. All I was going to say is that unfortunately, I think you and I share this, is that sometimes we get locked into sectarianism or these debates between, oh, I'm in this camp or I'm in this camp. And it can boil into polemicism, which is not the purpose of this course at all. We're not going to try and show up one school over the other. The idea here is just have a clear overview of one really serious philosophical school that made an entire difference to how Kalam evolved. And that's all we're trying to do, is make the ideas clear. Now, whether you want to now do a comparative study, which of course we'll allude to in some of our lessons, but that is not the focus of this class. The focus of this class is to really study very seriously Avicenna's ideas and its historicity and its best articulation possible, and then allow the tools for people to engage with those. And then you'll see, once you have a good understanding of this subject matter, when you get into Tahafut al-Falasifa, when you get to an al-Matalib al-Aliyah, when you get into Sharh al-Aqaid, all those conversations now preform your understanding of those texts. And you find the text even easier to understand because you have the background now. And that's what we want to do. So we're just kind of trying to present this as neutrally as possible. And that's the point. That's the point here.
Well, and I'll add, just in case that upsets somebody. You have to understand the context in which Dr. Shay was mentioning that the whole idea of philosophy is to produce critical thinking. And so if such a text was to be taught dogmatically, then it's almost like the purpose is lost. The idea that you're not coming here to learn your creed, that's not the point here. This is a philosophy course. And the reason why that's important is because take, for example, Al-Ghazali. Al-Ghazali wrote his Tahafut. And then Ibn Rushd wrote his Tahafut at-Tahafut. And you had people like Khajazada from the Ottomans that wrote their opinions on, really essentially their respectful refutations of Imam al-Hujjah al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala. But they only did that because they were endowed with that malaka of critical thinking, that ability to really pierce through the argument and follow the dalil, follow the evidence. That is how you have revival. That is how you have the resurrection almost of Islamic sciences, when they are engaged with critically, not dogmatically. The concept of naql has plagued us for a long time. This idea that we just transmit the taqreer of the Shaykh. So I took this taqreer in dictation from my Shaykh, and then I just regurgitate that without actually really thinking and engaging with it myself. One of the worst comments, by the way, this is a really sidetracked way off, but one of the worst things I ever heard was when I heard of somebody who was teaching a class in Kalam, and he forbade his students from looking at the Hawashi and commentaries before they entered the lesson. Now, somebody could respond to that and say, well, there's some fa'idah in that because he didn't want them to misunderstand, but those misunderstandings could have been clarified in the lesson. Because definitely the way of Dars al-Nizami, for example, is that you're supposed to do a lot of the work before you come in. So you're supposed to come in having understood 70% of what you're going to be reading and come in with questions, right? That's how you produce the malaka for yourself, this ability. And so when I heard that, that was quite shocking, because the idea is that you're supposed to prepare and then come in and challenge, and there's supposed to be engagement. The teacher's not necessarily doesn't need to have all of the answers, but there has to be a healthy debate and almost an argument, but with respect in the class, and that's how you're going to produce thinking beings. So that's the context in which Dr. Shoaib is speaking, and I think that's very important. Again, especially if you're teaching philosophy, right? That will be the whole point. Just very briefly, inshallah. So, I mean, you can have a look at the page on the website yourself, and it's got an introduction to Imam Abhari himself, which we could have maybe on a separate note. There'll be a separate video introducing Imam Abhari because he's very important. He's also interestingly a contemporary of Tusi, by the way. Sometimes I think people miss that. There we are.
I've got his text.
There we are, right? So, that's interesting because Atusi actually invites him over to his astronomy lab, where they're going to do some research, and he accepts, which is really interesting because he's a student of Razi, right? And amongst others. So that overlapping between Tusi from a completely different tradition, and Abhari, it's just interesting the dynamics in which they're working. Anyway, here's the first part, which is logic. So this is the pre-semester preparatory course that's going to take place over the summer, and you can check out pretty much all of the details are there for every single session. So session 1, linguistic expressions, etc. Session 2, universal definitions, propositions, etc., etc. It's all there for logic. Then you've got the first semester. This is now where we're going to be philosophizing, so to speak. And so the first we have here is physics. So the foundations of physics, again, it's quite detailed. Each lesson is pretty much laid out. Of course, there's going to be some manipulating of this at the discretion of Dr. Shoaib. But this is really the structure, because this is the structure of the text. So you can see the structure of bodies and the nature of form. And that's going to be a lot of fun, isn't it? I think just getting into the concepts of hylomorphism, what does that even mean? What is madda? It's such a if you've studied kalam and you've heard the word madda, that means something so different in hikmah. It's very different what madda means. The word ayn means something very different, to the hukama that it does. And so I think if somebody studied kalam and they came to this, it's going to be like a culture shock.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be. It would be. Yeah, it would be a culture shock. But that's good. That's good. Why? Because that's now going to make understanding Imam Razi easier. That's now going to be. Now you could open up Mullah Jalal al-Dawani, on EG, because he's deeply engaged in philosophy. And I'll tell you one thing: you cannot get through a single one of the higher level texts of the Farangi Mahal unless you have not studied Hikmah. Anyway, here we are. Surah
And this
Naw'iyya.
also explain even their differences between, for example, Dalil Huduth and Dalil Imkan. Why did the Mutakallimin prefer Huduth? Why did the Falasifa emphasize Imkan over Huduth? So those things are really tightly wrapped up into some of these ideas here.
And why did Ar-Razi say that according to the Mutaakhirun is both?
Yes.
Because that for me, that was one of the biggest eye openers. Because for Imam Ar-Razi, that's a point where he's engaged with so much philosophy that he appreciates the strength of philosophy. He's not taking it for granted. So I mean, again, this is all the whole point. Khala, void, that's gonna be a lot of fun. You can talk about black holes. Okay, hayyiz, all of these concepts are there.
It seems
Haraka,
like you've given this more thought than me, Sheikh Saab.
it's
Jazakallah.
I much prefer metaphysics, but
Yeah,
and it's true what you say. I did say that, and that, but it doesn't mean that this all is not something that is deeply beloved and important. Anyway, I'm not going to go through all. So this is the second part to natural philosophy. So here, as earlier, Dr. was talking about, celestial spheres, the sublunary world, all of that. It's all here. To be honest, even the landing page is a very good resource, I think, because it's broken the text down quite well. And then
yeah,
Islamic
yeah,
cosmology, lastly. And by the way, each one of these parts of the qism. So the qism here is for natural philosophy. And then each qism has funun. So each one has a fan. It has like a sub-science, and then each fan has masail. And so the way I broke it down here was that each fan had masail, and each mas'ala we turn into lessons, so it's easier, etc. So all of this, even cloud formation and rain, all of this stuff, it's very, very interesting because it's almost like history as well as
yeah.
actually philosophy. But yeah, then you got metaphysics. This is the second semester from January onwards or February. I don't remember. So first you have the Umur Amma. So most students in Dars al-Nizami in the traditional subcontinental seminary, right at the end of their Kalam studies, they will be studying Umur Amma, and they will be studying the Umur Amma section from Sayyid al-Sharif al-Jurjani's Sharh al-Mawaqif of EG, and they would normally be reading it with a couple of Hawashi, particularly that of Mir Zahid. So normally you'll hear, oh, so-and-so read Mir Zahid. What they mean by that is Mir Zahid's gloss on Jurjani's commentary on EG's Umur Amma, which is, I mean, you can translate it as ontology. There may be some objection to that, but really, I mean, there's no one word to describe Umur Amma per se, but it's about understanding existence qua existence, being qua being, so to speak. It's really what you can understand from existence in and of itself without any relation to anything else. That's really a summary of it, and you've got that here. Here in this, we will be engaging with some Neoplatonic and Kalam perspectives throughout this, and that's only natural. So again, universal, particular, priority. This becomes very important. So okay, can I just for a minute, can I give this one point? So often when you're studying the iqtisad, for example, I know that you have the iqtisad that you teach as well, and taken from Al-Razi, students will be learning, they would have learned that the attributes of God in the Ash'ari Maturidi framework, that they are qadim, right? And so you have this charge on the part of the Mu'tazila, the sort of hard rationalist school of the early period, that they would say, well, this is ta'addud al-qudama, that this is a multiplicity of pre-eternal beings, and therefore shirk billah, right? This is polytheism of sorts. And then the response is given. But by this period, the response is given through this concept in here, and these sorts of concepts, which are that something can be bizat and not bizaman, So
Mhm.
something can be essentially after something, but not in time. Now, what does that mean? Again, this is why philosophy is important, because these things are covered. Likewise, potentiality, the concept of bil quwwa as opposed to bil fi'l, imkan. Then we're going to be doing i'tibarat as well, ikhtira'iyya, intiza'iyya. These are all terms I'm throwing out there because I know not just for the absolute beginner in philosophy, but the students of Kalam that would have heard these terms. The Maqulat Ashar, the 10 categories of Aristotle are going to be done. Then you've got Module 2, Philosophical Theology. This is the scholasticism of Ibn Sina. What does he mean by Wajib al-Wujud, etc., etc., etc. And then at the end, you've got angels and immaterial intellects. This is really going to get into, because remember something as well about Avicenna. He is peripatetic, but he has certain Neoplatonic leanings as well. And so that's why it's a little bit confusing with Ibn Sina, because although he is a Masha'i, he is primarily a peripatetic, just as the Mutakallimun, broadly speaking, could be categorized as peripatetic thinkers, but some of them have very strong Neoplatonic leanings. The theologians I'm talking about, not just the Sufis, the theologians
Mhm.
themselves. Likewise, like for example, even the Muthul, al-Aflatoniya, the Platonic forms, you have statements from Imam Razi, you have other theologians that, so it's not necessarily, that all of them are unanimously in agreement on every single mas'ala. No, far be it.
Yeah.
They are not at all. And that's really, and then you've got a section here about the text itself. This image, just in case you're wondering, is a manuscript of the commentary on Hidayat al-Hikma, one of the greatest commentaries ever written by Mir Mebzi or Maybudi. And the reason why I say, and that's it, just who can join in here, you've got something about the author Athiruddin al-Abhari as well. The reason, just to end on that bit, the reason why Maybuzi is a student favorite is because he, as he himself articulates explicitly, his objective was to synthesize in the commentary of Hidayat al-Hikmah between all of the various schools of philosophy. And by philosophy, he means by that also the mutakallimun. So for him, the hukama, the mutakallimun, the Sufiya, and I know some people don't like this term, philosophical Sufism, but it's a true statement. That's a real term to describe them, because Sufism means different things to different people. One meaning of Sufism is just tahdhib and nafs. But what you have to remember is that tahdhib al-nafs is the mode through which the Sufis open up their broader epistemology for them. And when they do that, they are benefactors of kushufa, they're benefactors of kashf, of unveilings. And for them, that gives them a level of tahqiq. And by tahqiq, that means that gives them a true image of reality. That then follows them having a pure tawheed, which is the essence of the purification of self. So the Sufis don't really, so if somebody was to say, but this is just about being kind and being good and being generous, that's taking something away from all the other Muslims, because the mutakallimun were kind and generous and giving, and so are the fuqaha, the jurists, not just the Sufis, right? But when we say Sufism, we don't just mean by it ethics and morals. We mean by it such a focus on ethics and morals and the purification of the soul that it actually unlocks for them a broader understanding of reality and truth, which ultimately purifies their tawheed, their belief in God, and that is ultimately the objective, isn't it? So I know some people don't like that, but in any case, this is the whole point of the class. The whole point is that these things can be discussed, debated, inshallah ta'ala, and that's the whole idea. We did actually talk about, somebody said, oh, why not just record lectures and put them up? And we both were talking about this, that really and that's fine, by the way, that works for a lot of people. But I think for us, really having student engagement and having that conversation, it's really important.
Yeah. It's for this reason why I'm not a fan of on-demand courses. For me to be able to have that live engagement is seriously important for several reasons. Number one, you get to hash out some of the ideas, you get to clarify misconceptions that are out there. I think, but more importantly, there's a suhbah that you create. There's a community, a companionship that you create in that learning process. And as I know my students by name, each one of them I know by name. And when you're in a classroom filled with hundreds and 200, and you don't know them, what kind of relationships that. So I think that definitely having that kind of live interaction, that engagement is really, I think that's really the prophetic step, in my opinion.
Yeah, which is why we actually kept the number of students, quite low, to have an actual smaller class for that, inshallah ta'ala. I think that's a good overview. So if I could just say a few remarks, and then I'll have you say a few remarks, and we'll try to end. Otherwise, we can keep talking for the rest of the night. But I think so with philosophy, with medieval philosophy, Islamic philosophy. Of course, they did debate, and there is a difference to whether it's the study of existent beings or whether it's the study of ma'lum, of what's known, right? So that's a debate. I don't want to get into that. But if we just take the first definition, it's really about studying what exists. So that really is absolutely everything. Everything comes under that. Now, of course, if you are if you do not accept the fact that there's a thing called mental existence, then you will have to say ma'lum, because everything that can be known, because that allows you to study what's in the mind as well as what's external to the mind. But if you take mawjood, what exists both in the mind and both externally, then there's nothing left. So philosophy really is the study of absolutely everything. just done in a systematic way. And so the idea of this, again, works like Hidayat al-Hikma, and the way it was studied traditionally is that it gives people a paradigm of thinking. It gives them a system of philosophizing. And I think that's what's really, really important. And to be able to go from beginning to the end, I think it's super important.
MashaAllah.
So, is there anything that you'd like to conclude with, Malay?
No, all I just want to say that, we hope that this little video, this chat, honestly, helps get an overview of what we're trying to achieve and deliver. And if you have any questions, please do reach out to either myself or Maulana Saab. We're always happy to answer any questions that you may have. But more than that, we look forward to seeing a wonderful cohort. We already have a few signups, mashallah. And I hope that this will be a fun engagement with a very pivotal text in our tradition. Inshallah, ya Rabb. Ameen.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah, amazing. All right, Barakallah feekum. Thank you all for tuning in. And inshallah, we will see you soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.